Right, let's bring in Paul Kelly for some analysis now. Joining me, the Australian's editor-at-large, Paul Kelly from Sydney. Paul, I tell you, no one wants to be where we are now. You've written an excellent piece in The Australian. I'll talk about some other things in just a moment, but there was a lot of debate here on this desk on Saturday night as we watched the Eden-Monaro results come in, and the line from the Labor Party when things got tight was, well, of course it was likely that the Liberals would do well. Everyone's coming back to incumbents around the world out of this pandemic. But you say that's not necessarily the case. They don't just get a leave pass. In your argument, you say it's what you do as the incumbent, how you manage the crisis, that really matters. So talk to me, how do you see things nationally for the PM? And in particular, I'm interested in your take in how Victoria's playing out for the Labor Party and in particular the Premier.
Well, first of all, on the by-election, Peter, I mean, this by-election was really significant. It was conducted in an extraordinary climate. Australia is back in recession. Unemployment's over 7%. Real unemployment's at 13%. The country's fighting a pandemic, and the electorate, Eden-Monaro, was the front line of the bushfires. So I think there are many conclusions to draw from this. It is the status quo result. Anthony Albanese won. That's very important for him. But there was a swing to the Liberals in the primary vote and the two-party preferred vote, and I draw three conclusions from this. First of all, to this stage, and I stress to this stage, the people are not blaming Scott Morrison for the economic situation, they're blaming the pandemic. Secondly, they're prepared to give a qualified vote at this stage to the economic actions taken by the Prime Minister to combat the downturn. And thirdly, the predictions we saw in January that the Prime Minister would be crippled unless he took resolute and dramatically new action on climate change has proved to be false. So they're a pretty important group of conclusions.
Talk to me about the Labor Party's primary vote, because I watched that carefully on Saturday night. It's becoming now a feature. In this race, you would assume, given the vagaries of the seat, the issue of climate and bushfires, that the Greens would have done far better than they did as well. How does Labor resurrect that primary vote, given the constant leakage they have to the Greens?
Agreed. A couple of points here. By-elections, of course, are never good predictors of subsequent elections. But we should note that while this was a by-election where there's traditionally a protest vote against the government, the Labor primary vote fell and the Green primary vote fell significantly, again in this bushfire front electorate. And I make that point. If we go back and look at the coverage in January, the coverage in January was that bushfires and climate change would dominate over the next 12 months. Well, Eden-Monaro suggests that there's another phenomenon at work completely to that. When it comes to the Labor primary vote, I argue this is now a 15-year problem and Labor doesn't seem to be able to address it. The Labor primary vote has been insufficient at every election since Kevin Rudd's stellar victory in 2007, and that includes Julia Gillard's win in 2010. The Labor primary vote at the election last year was 33.3, and the primary vote continued to fall away in Eden-Monaro, even though there were a large number of candidates. The large number of candidates didn't prevent the Liberal primary vote from increasing. So I think the Labor Party has got a structural and cultural problem when it comes to the primary vote. Whether that will be rectified by the economic and health crisis the country will face over the next 12 months, we'll have to wait and see.
Right, I want to move on to the issue of China, notwithstanding the fact that DFAT's put out, the Department of Foreign Affairs has put out this very stark new travel warning and none of us can actually go anywhere. Let's look at what the warning says. It says Australians travelling to China may face arbitrary detention under new national security laws. Now, the concern there, obviously, is escalations coming out of recent law changes in Hong Kong. The Chinese officials, though, quickly came out and said there's no need to worry if you abide by the law. Do you think that these comments all pertain to Hong Kong? Do you think China's slapping us down perhaps because we made the offer, or certainly kept the door open to safe haven visitors of visas for citizens out of Hong Kong?
Well, I think there are a couple of points here, Peter. The first one is that the relationship between Australia and China is on a downward spiral, and hardly a week goes by without there being some sort of new incident that inflames the situation. I think the Hong Kong situation has got to be relevant to this. We're now seeing Hong Kong being inflicted with new national security laws imposed by Beijing, which is likely to change the fundamental situation when it comes to security and liberty in Hong Kong. And we've already seen governments around the world, including the Australian government, indicate that will be sympathetic in terms of taking people from Hong Kong. So I think you've got both those factors at work. What we're seeing now is a profound lack of trust between Australia and China. I mean, I think this is a really damaging and dangerous situation. And while I appreciate that this is overwhelmingly the creation of what China has done, it's nonetheless dangerous. And we've got to try over time to do something to build some sort of more meaningful and trustful communication between the two countries, and that won't be easy.
Well, and Daniel Andrews is doing his level best down here, doing a big debt deal with the Belt and Road and China. It is extraordinary. You've got such a conflict between where state governments are at and certainly the federal government in this area. Paul Kelly, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Peter.